At 71 degrees Celsius, even breathing can kill you. But this 90-year-old widow stepped into the cold to save newborn lives at 71 degrees Celsius. Sound dies first, then color, then hope. In the deepest winter of Siberia, when even breathing feels like swallowing glass, Ekaterina Morozova, a 90-year-old widow, opened the door of her wooden cabin and stepped into a cold so severe it erased names, memories, and time itself. Most people who hear that number, -71, imagine death within minutes. They are not wrong. Skin freezes in seconds. Lungs burn with every inhale. Metal shatters like glass. And yet Ekaterina stood there, wrapped in layers of worn wool and a faded fur coat that once belonged to her husband, her breath forming weak clouds that the wind tore apart instantly. She had survived this cold before. She had survived famine, war, loss, and 60 winters without the man she loved. But nothing had prepared her for what she would find that morning. The storm had ended only hours earlier. Snowdrifts rose higher than the cabin windows, sculpted into sharp, frozen waves by the relentless wind. The forest beyond stood silent. No birds, no animals, no movement. In Siberia, silence is never peace. It is a warning. Ekaterina had gone outside for one reason only, to check her traps. Not to hunt, she no longer had the strength, but to ensure no animal suffered needlessly. She believed pain should never be wasted, not in humans, not in beasts. That was when she heard it. A sound so faint it could have been imagined. A soft, broken movement beneath the snow. She froze, listening. There it was again. A weak scratching, desperate, fading. Ekaterina followed the sound, each step slow and deliberate. At her age, one fall meant death. At this temperature, even stopping too long could be fatal. Still, she knelt and brushed snow aside with trembling hands. What she uncovered made her gasp. A mother rabbit, her fur stiff with ice, one hind leg trapped beneath a collapsed ice crust. Her sides heaved shallowly. Beneath her body, almost invisible, were newborn kits, pink, hairless, blind, barely alive. They would not survive another hour. Ekaterina knew this without thinking. She had delivered calves in blizzards, buried children in frozen ground, and watched wolves starve at her doorstep. Life in Siberia teaches truth brutally and quickly. The rabbit tried to move, failed. Its eyes met Ekaterina's, and in that moment something old and fierce stirred in the widow's chest. "I am not finished yet," she whispered, to the rabbit, to herself, to the cold. Saving them meant risk. Carrying them meant exposure. Stopping meant death. But leaving them meant something worse. Ekaterina removed her gloves. The cold bit instantly. She reached forward. The moment Ekaterina touched the rabbit, pain exploded through her fingers like fire. Skin protested. Joints screamed. At 71 degrees Celsius, flesh does not numb. It fractures. She ignored it. With slow, careful movements, she freed the trapped leg, breaking ice with the edge of a small bone-handled knife she always carried. The rabbit twitched weakly, but did not flee. It couldn't. The kits barely moved. Ekaterina did not hesitate. She opened her coat and pressed the newborns against her chest, inside layers of wool already warmed by her frail body. Then, with trembling arms, she lifted the mother rabbit and cradled it like a child. The walk back to the cabin should have taken 3 minutes. It took 12. The wind returned without warning. A white wall rose around her, erasing the forest, the ground, the sky. Snow drove sideways, piercing her eyes, filling her mouth, burning her lungs. Each breath felt thinner than the last. Her legs weakened. Her heart hammered. Memories intruded uninvited. Her husband collapsing in the snow decades earlier. The sound of wolves howling during the famine winter. The cold fingers of death she had brushed so many times before. She stumbled, nearly fell. The rabbit stirred. One of the kits let out a faint squeak. That sound, small, fragile, alive, cut through everything. "No," Ekaterina muttered. "Not today." She leaned forward and forced her legs to move. When she finally reached the cabin, her vision had narrowed to a tunnel. Hands shaking violently, she forced the door open and collapsed inside, slamming it shut against the storm. The cabin was dark, cold, but compared to outside it was mercy. She moved on instinct. The rabbits were placed near the stove. She coaxed the fire to life with hands that barely obeyed her, using birch bark and old pine splinters. As warmth slowly returned, pain bloomed everywhere, her fingers blistering, her knees burning, her chest aching with each breath. The mother rabbit lay still, too still. Ekaterina pressed her ear to its chest. A heartbeat, weak, but there. She warmed water, wrapped the rabbits in cloth, used a dropper carved years ago from bone to give the mother moisture. She knew nothing of veterinary medicine, but she knew warmth. She knew patience. Hours passed. The storm screamed outside. Inside, life fought quietly. One kit moved, then another. By nightfall, the mother rabbit lifted her head. Ekaterina sagged against the wall, exhausted beyond words. She had won the first battle. The cold, however, had not finished. Pain woke her before dawn, not gentle pain. The kind that warns something is wrong. Ekaterina tried to stand and nearly fell. Her left hand, exposed too long during the rescue, was swollen, discolored, frostbite, severe. She looked at it calmly. She had expected this. What she had not expected was the dizziness, the weakness, the way the room tilted when she moved. Hypothermia leaves debts, and now the bill had come due. She checked the rabbits. The mother was alive, feeding her kits. They would survive. That knowledge filled her with quiet relief and sharp fear. If she collapsed now, they would all die. Ekaterina forced herself to act. She melted snow for water, ate a piece of frozen bread soaked in broth, wrapped her injured hand tightly, and kept it close to her body. She moved slowly, deliberately, conserving energy like a candle burning low. Outside, the storm returned stronger. Snow buried the cabin door. The temperature dropped even further. The stove began to fail. Ekaterina fed it her last good wood, By evening, her breath rattled in her chest, each inhale shallow. Her vision blurred. She lay on the floor beside the rabbits, listening to the fire crackle weakly. Death in Siberia is quiet. It comes like sleep. She felt it then, heavy, tempting. She thought of her husband. "I will see you soon," she whispered. But then movement. One of the kits crawled clumsily toward her warmth, tiny, blind, alive because she had chosen to step into the cold. Ekaterina smiled. "No," she said softly. "Not yet." She forced herself upright, fed the fire with furniture. Old memories burned to keep new life alive. Through the night, she stayed awake, breathing, watching, surviving. Morning came pale and fragile. The storm had passed. Sunlight filtered through frost-covered windows, turning ice into gold. Ekaterina was alive. Barely, but alive. Days later, neighbors arrived on snowmobiles, alarmed by the silence of her cabin. They found her weak, injured, but smiling faintly as she pointed toward the corner where a mother rabbit lay curled around her kits. The story spread. A 90-year-old widow, minus 71 degrees. Life saved against reason. Ekaterina never called herself brave. She said only this: the cold takes enough. Sometimes you take something back. That winter the rabbits were released near the forest edge. They vanished into the snow. And somewhere in Siberia life continued, because one old woman refused to let the cold have the final word. If this story touched you, consider subscribing for more real survival stories like this.